Hello, every pony. So this is another fan fiction reading, as requested by animefreak 4453. This is Grief by LunaUsesCaps. Now, I'm going to go ahead and warn you ahead of time. This story is both sad and emotionally disturbing. And I know it's been a bit of a delay getting this out there. Originally, I was going to try to take the text, divvy it up by character and dialogue, and record it all separately and put it together, make it all nice. This is a really long fiction for only being one chapter. It's like 6,500 words, which makes it as long as 2 average Angel Swift chapters or 3 average Roommates of Vampire chapters. It's a lot, and it was taking way too long. So I decided I'm just going to start recording it. I'll clean it up a little bit, but I'm just going to jump into it. Also, I'm sorry for the delay. I've actually worked on recording this one a couple times now. But I'll be perfectly honest, like, this is one of those fictions that really kind of bums you out when you read it, and that's exactly what's been happening to me. Like, I'll start to work on it, and then I'll get so far, and I'll just be all, like, mopey, and I have to stop, and, like, I'm all down and depressed and crap, and then, like, I try to re-listen to it, and I feel like it sounds like crap, and I don't like it, but I'm going to push past that, because up to this point, I have not turned down a single requested fan fiction, and I'm not about to start now. And I'm not complaining, I'm not dissing the author or animefreak for requesting it, because it is a good fiction. It's really emotionally evocative, but it's just been really hard for me to record, but I'm going to muscle through it. Because it's so long, I'm probably going to upload it in like 2 pieces. I mean, like, half of it's probably going to be about a half-hour video. So I'm going to try to chop it up a little bit, make it a little shorter. So hopefully we can at least get the first half of this uploaded tonight. I'm going to try to at least push through it that far, and then we'll go from there. So, I guess let's get started.
It's a shame. You always used to prepare yourself so well when you had an audience with the princess, Rainbow Dash said. They let you stay in the castle and this is how you repay them?
Twilight looked at her in the mirror, refusing to turn around. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her mane was disastrously unkempt, and her teeth had been ground into painful stubs. Lying next to her on the vanity was a copy of the latest Daring Do novel, an unused hairbrush, and a pair of scissors. "Why are you here?" she asked bitterly.
That's a really good question, Twilight,
the Pegasus began, circling the unicorn with a mocking grin.
Why am I here?
With a scream that had been long repressed, the lavender mare picked up the book in her mouth and threw it at the mirror, shattering it. In her life, Twilight Sparkle had experienced many emotions, many of them positive, many of them negative. But for the first time in her entire existence, she was feeling the most powerful and pure emotion she'd ever imagined possible. Hatred. Cold, unforgiving hatred. It was a thing that didn't come easily. A terrible fate bestowed upon anyone and everyone she directed this hatred at. A twist of the knife that was already lodged into her victim from the guilt of the heinous crime he or she must have committed to awaken such fury from the lavender mare. "What do you mean, backorder?" Twilight asked, growing increasingly unstable by the second. "You said the new Daring Do book would be in by today. I have a customer that has been patiently waiting for it." She had to admit to herself, patiently was a bit of an exaggeration on Twilight's part. She knew that Rainbow Dash meant well, but knocking on her door every morning at 6 sharp to see if it had arrived early was more than a little excessive. Not that she could complain. It was an effective method for making sure that Spike woke up on time and kept to a regular schedule. That being known, Twilight couldn't help but be helplessly frustrated at having to disappoint one of her friends. Rainbow had been waiting on this novel for weeks, and she could predict the imminent rage that would engulf the Pegasus when she delivered the bad news. "My apologies, miss," offered a scrawny male colt. "But that's what the company told me when I went to pick it up. They said it should be here within a few days." Twilight sighed, defeated. As if she didn't have enough problems of her own to worry about, now she had to add stressing out a friend to her list. It was relatively early, so perhaps the unicorn had time to prepare some tea before Rainbow arrived, with hopes of softening the blow. "I'll see you later then, I guess," she said insincerely before closing her door on the undeserving target of her anger. Well, she thought as she began to make her way up the stairs to her room, I suppose he deserves a sorry for all that nonsense. Twilight focused on her doorknob as it was enveloped by a dark pink aura, opening to reveal a quiet but nonetheless chaotic-looking bedroom. The mare took a quick look at her quarters, a soft grunt escaping her as she reviewed her haphazardly positioned bedsheets and covers, which were lying at odd angles between her mattress and the floor. She walked over to Spike's basket, lightly prodding him with her hoof. "Wake up, sleepyhead."
What?
"Oh," he started, quickly glancing around the room as he was risen from his slumber. Content that whatever fears he had weren't realized, he turned to his offender with a frown.
What's the deal, Twilight? Do you have any idea what time it is?"
She knelt down to rustle her assistant's spikes. "Do you?" she taunted playfully. Spike considered the question for a moment.
"No," he announced finally. "But what's so important that I need to get up when it's completely dark out?"
"Rainbow Dash's book is on back order," she said gravely. The dragon gave Twilight an incredulous look, but once the reality of the situation hit him, his eyes widened.
"Mother of Celestia," he began, a sense of dread overtaking his features.
"I'll start stormproofing the library." Twilight smiled, somewhat relieved that Spike wasn't mad enough at her to be utterly humorless. "I don't think that will be necessary," she mused, rising up from her crouched stance. "Just put on a pot of tea for us, please. I think Rainbow should be here around 6, so that gives you plenty of time." 6 came and went, as did 7 and 8 and 9. Now almost noon, Twilight's tea had long been cold, and she couldn't help but wonder why the Pegasus who had been so eager to claim her next edition in the series was nowhere to be seen on the date of its supposed arrival. Just as she was about to give up hope and go into town, Twilight heard a soft rapping on the door. "Come in, Fluttershy," she called, expecting the unusually pathetic knock to belong to the yellow Pegasus.
It's me,"
corrected a raspy voice.
"I'm welcome too, right?"
Twilight's ears perked up. "Rainbow Dash?" Twilight asked in surprise as she jumped up to answer the door in person, pushing it open with a hoof. "Where have you been?" As the door opened completely, Twilight was taken aback by the sight. Her friend's mane was even more disheveled than usual, and her eyes were bloodshot. Choosing to respect her Rainbow's privacy, she simply stepped silently aside and allowed the Cyan Mare to enter. "I made some tea for us," Twilight said, hoping to break the social wall that had been formed between them in the brief minute of awkwardness. "Though it's probably cold."
"You're wondering about why I look like a wreck, right?"
Rainbow interrupted bitterly. Her voice was cold, uncaring, and Twilight didn't like it one bit. But it wasn't her place to act on that notion. "A little bit, yes. What happened to you?"
"Was just up late working,"
she responded half-heartedly, leaving Twilight partially unconvinced of the statement's truth.
"How are you?"
"Fine," answered the unicorn. This was new. In the entire month Rainbow had been coming to the library, she had no interest in her friend's well-being, only that of the book she was waiting on. Confused, Twilight decided to inquire her on it. "Are you here for your book?" Rainbow Dash bit her lip.
"Yes,"
she answered unenthusiastically.
"I'm guessing it came in this morning?"
Well, this was it. Rainbow was going to be furious, and there was nothing Twilight could do to calm her down. After all of her days of waiting, the Pegasus was going to be let down. The Lavender Mare cringed, knowing exactly what response would come of her bad news. "No, it's on back order," she forced out, bracing herself for the oncoming torrent of rage. But it never came.
"Oh,"
Rainbow Dash replied without any noticeable change in mood.
"That's a shame."
Twilight completely froze. This was unlike her friend. No, this was the polar opposite of Rainbow Dash, the hot-headed action-craving daredevil and self-proclaimed best flyer in Equestria. Her behavior made no sense, and the only response Twilight could muster was slowly opening and closing her mouth.
"So,"
Rainbow Dash said, snapping the unicorn back into reality,
You said you made tea. Can I have some?
Of course, Twilight said, unsure of what exactly was going on. Make yourself at home. As Rainbow clambered onto a nearby couch, Twilight trotted briskly into the kitchen, where she was met with Spike's curious eye.
How'd she take it?
He asked cautiously, expecting the worst. Twilight flipped the kettle burner on while she thought over just how to answer that. She didn't care. Spike raised an eyebrow.
What?
Twilight looked back into the living room, watching Rainbow Dash as she sat peacefully on the sofa. Rainbow was completely fine with it. She seemed so indifferent.
Do you think she's okay?
Asked Spike, a hint of concern dripping from his voice. The unicorn dismissed it entirely. Of course she is. She is just tired from working all night. The dragon seemed content with that answer until a stray thought struck him.
Working? But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Hasn't been for days.
He was right. There had been absolutely no weather work all week, and Twilight had even heard from Cloudkicker how nice it was to have some time off. Twilight had been ordering Rainbow's book at the post office, and Cloudkicker had been talking to one of the employees. She remembered it being a gray Pegasus, but the name didn't come to her. But Rainbow had no reason to lie to her, unless she was having trouble with something. Unwilling to add any extra stress to herself, Twilight decided that whatever it was, Rainbow Dash would be open about it eventually if it was important enough for anyone to hear. As if on cue, the teapot let out a high-pitched whistle. Twilight extended her arcane influence to her surroundings, levitating multiple objects to prepare the finished drinks. Content with her work, she brought the cups out to the main room, where Dash was still sitting quietly. Twilight placed the Pegasus tea on a nightstand in front of her, where she accepted it with a small nod. Drinking from her own cup, the unicorn took a moment to study her friend in detail. Rainbow Dash didn't just look completely exhausted. It dawned on Twilight that she looked distant, careful, anxious to the point that she couldn't even be comfortable in her friend's home. Twilight was obviously concerned, but more than that, curious at what the Cyan Mare could have been doing that previous night. But before Twilight could make any assumptions, Rainbow broke the silence.
Do you ever think, Twilight?
What kind of question was that? Of course she thought. Every pony did. It was a basic fact of life. What are you talking about? I think all the time. We all do, Twilight said, cocking her head at the unusual query.
No,
Rainbow Dash said, shaking her head.
I mean, do you ever think about yourself? About the world? About what's really important?
Twilight shuffled her hooves in thought. No, I guess not. I've always been content with just living life as it comes to me. Why so cryptic all of a sudden? This isn't like you at all. Rainbow Dash didn't answer. Instead, she simply turned to stare out the window. She held that pose for a while, taking in the morning view before letting out a long, pained sigh. The sound of it made Twilight's lip quiver. She had never been put in this kind of position before. But that sound, that terrible, defeated sigh, it made her stomach twist in pain. There had to be something she could do. Before she had the chance, Rainbow Dash got up from the couch and walked over towards the library exit.
Thanks for the tea,
she said politely as she opened the door, taking her leave without waiting for Twilight to respond. The Lavender Mare watched the door swing back and forth before clicking shut. An uncomfortable, still silence quickly engulfed the entire library as she took a moment to consider what just happened. She needs a friend, Twilight concluded.
Twilight, dinner's ready,
Spike called. Maybe it was. Maybe it was even the best meal Twilight would ever eat in her life. But tonight she had no appetite at all. The morning's events still hung over her, occupying every thought process she could form. It wasn't voluntary. The unicorn had tried to get her mind off of Rainbow Dash, but she knew that there was something she had to do. She couldn't just sit here locked in her room all day. That utter look of despair. What could possibly cause that out of nowhere? Just yesterday had Dash been at her door, eager to jump into the first chapter of Daring Do and the Keepers of the Seventh Gem. But now the Pegasus was just a drained, exhausted, empty shell of what she had been. It wasn't Twilight's place, but maybe talking to her was the best idea. How much could possibly be made worse by simply asking if she was okay? Worst case scenario, Rainbow Dash didn't want to talk about it. and the unicorn is asked to leave.
Twilight!
But it was nothing to starve over, especially seeing as she was pleased with that decision.
Coming,
she finally answered, making her way down the stairs and into the kitchen. Twilight's heart skipped a beat when she looked up at the clock.
11?
She asked obliviously. I've been up there for the entire day?
Yeah,
Spike answered.
I didn't even hear you writing. What were you doing up there anyway?
Do you ever think, Twilight? What are you talking about? I think all the time. We all do. I mean, do you ever think about yourself, about the world, about what's really important? Thinking, Twilight replied.
Well, I made soup,
the dragon announced, placing 2 bowls of bubbling green liquid on the table.
It's your favorite, daisy stalk chowder.
The lavender mare took her seat and began eating, albeit not as exuberantly as her reptilian companion. Though hunger wasn't an option, she still wasn't in the mood to drink her entire meal in one gulp, even if it did happen to be the best meal Twilight would ever eat in her life. The irony wasn't lost on her, and for a moment she laughed, much to the confusion of Spike. He stared at her incredulously.
What's so funny?
He asked, raising his lack of an eyebrow. Nothing, she replied, waving him off with a hoof. Before Spike could insist on getting more information out of the unicorn, there was a loud knocking on the door. Twilight smiled. For once, she knew exactly who it was, and this time she was going to set things right with Rainbow Dash. Twilight walked over to the door, pushing it open. I'm glad you came back, But the unicorn cut herself off as she noticed that standing in front of her wasn't the rainbow-maned Pegasus. Instead, the pathetic-looking colt from earlier that morning, giving her a sheepish smile. Twilight worked her mouth for a minute, but eventually her sense returned to her. Envelope, what are you doing here so late? She asked. Well, he began, poking around his saddlebags to find a small, rectangular package. This came in early, so I thought you'd like to have it now instead of tomorrow. Twilight's eyes lit up. This was perfect. She could bring the book over and give it to Rainbow. This would surely cheer the Pegasus up. Just a little, if anything. Much to the male colt's surprise, the unicorn jumped out of her house and trapped him in a bear hug. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you!
Can't breathe,
Envelope muttered, gagging under the force of Twilight's hooves. Upon seeing his distress, she released her grip. Sorry, but you have no idea how much you've helped me. Any time, Miss Gotta go. Bye. Twilight quickly shouted as she ran out the door, leaving one very confused colt in her wake. As her balloon closed in on Rainbow Dash's flying mansion, Twilight focused her energy on her hooves, feeling a quick, sharp pain shoot through them as her cloud-walking spell took effect. It had been a long time since the unicorn had any reason to cast this spell, and to say the least, she obviously didn't like doing it that often. But for this occasion, it was well worth it. Landing softly on Rainbow's cloud home, Twilight hopped out of the balloon and took a moment to consider the situation. The Pegasus had looked terribly desperate and tired, so Twilight truly needed to prepare herself for the worst. Whatever was bothering Dash was bad. Really bad. What if it involved her friends? What if it involved her? Had someone hurt Dash? The questions kept rolling in, but the unicorn dismissed them all. She was going to give Rainbow Dash the book, and they were going to talk it all out. She walked up to her friend's marble door, pushing it open. It was right then that Twilight knew Dash would come out of this, and that everything was going to be okay. But sometimes the world just doesn't want to cut you a break. At first, Twilight didn't process it. She didn't recognize it. It was wrong. A joke played on her. A sick joke that could only be realized in a fully black spectrum of existence. A spectrum she couldn't be on. A dimension she wasn't part of. One she only wandered into accidentally. What if that were the case? Why was it so real? The unicorn dropped the book, walking slowly toward Rainbow Dash's bedside. On the floor, the cyan mare lay silent and still. There was no blood or rope, no debris or weapon, nothing. There was nothing to explain this for what it was. Yet it was nonetheless. Acting on impulse, Twilight extended a hoof to check for signs of life. A heartbeat, slow breathing, anything. Reality set in, and she was greeted with electrifying stillness and deafening silence. It burned into the mare's mind, and in turn she clutched her head in pain. Twilight had understood the phenomena of blurred vision and dulled perception in times of extreme emotional stress, but she had never expected to go into shock. She had never expected to feel non-existent. Yes, that was the word. Non-existent. She felt as a spectator, watching this portion of her life be played out for her, a front-row seat to her unwanted, indescribable piece of the world. But the theater was cheap. There was no noise, and the sight blended into the background. It was forced, but at the same time restrained. A contradiction that caused it to look deformed, which, in hindsight, was a perfect way to describe it. Hours seemed to pass as her search for any signs of hope failed to turn up any results. At this point, her vision began to realign into focus. She saw clearly. More clearly than she had seen in her life, but what she heard, that was truly torturous. Ticking. She hadn't noticed it before. A grandfather clock, a hoof watch, anything. Ticking. Close, yet so far. Mocking her as if to tell her that the time was moving by, that she only had so long to make a move. As if to tell her that she could escape, as if to tell her she could change the course of events, but only if she did it right now. She knew better, though. The clocks were a lie, and now was far too late. Twilight let out a breath that she hadn't realized she'd been holding as she got up from the floor. Surveying the scene before her a second time, now with more accurate perception, everything seemed to click into place. On Rainbow's nightstand sat an open bottle of white pills and a note. Drawing obvious conclusions, the unicorn sighed. She hadn't cried as of now. She didn't feel sorrow, or pain, or grief. Empty. Numb. Those were the only words she could use to describe it. She felt nothing now. Twilight didn't want to read the note, but it was inevitable, so she decided to bite the bullet and get it over with. Swallowing a lump that had formed in her throat, Twilight formed an aura around the letter, bringing it closer to her muzzle.
So this is it, huh? I guess that isn't how you expected me to start this. Honestly, I don't even know who I'm addressing. As of now, I don't care. You probably want some sort of apology or explanation, so I'll give it my best shot. Earlier today, I went to visit one of my friends.
Twilight coughed, her stomach jerking up into her throat.
And while I was there, I asked her if she thought about life. She didn't, and that was okay. It was actually what I expected. We're all so young, and that feeling of invincibility we have, it makes us ignorant to those kind of thoughts. Makes us want to avoid them. But I can't. I've never been able to. That's why I put on a brave face and feigned superiority. Pretended to be confident to reinforce that same invincibility within myself. Needless to say, it didn't work. Perhaps confidence is just that, though. The ability to superimpose a falsity upon yourself and wear it as all that you are. To live by ambition. In the end, though, it's just that. A falsity. A mask. A facade, whatever you want to call it. That's why anyone who knows me wouldn't understand this writing. It makes no sense. I've never spoken of myself as one with words, but I guess for something to stick out, another thing must be ignored for balance to be maintained. The calligraphy. The articulacy. This is beautiful, Twilight said to herself, only to realize just what exactly she was complimenting. At that point she lost it, turning from Rainbow's note to vomit. Dry heaving, the unicorn composed herself, but not without consequences.
She was absolutely, utterly disgusted with herself. This was so sick, so wrong, so perverted. And she thought of it as beauty.
I think I'm getting off topic. This may seem out of nowhere or unexplained, but it isn't. If anything caused me to be like this, I can't remember what it was. But only recently, only just a few months ago, did I truly realize how severe I had a problem. The blind fear and insecurity. The crippling thought of being hated and marked a failure. The day of the Best Young Flyers competition. I understand that stage fright is common, but I almost killed her. I was so obsessed with myself. I lived in Cloudsdale my entire life. I knew exactly what would happen if she had gone up and done the act she was planning to do. But I was preoccupied. Too preoccupied to explain that fact. Too preoccupied with a falsity. I refused to let that happen again.
What? Twilight asked. No one. Turning the parchment around several times before throwing it on the ground. That's it? That can't be it! How could Dash have stopped on that? The letter barely explained a thing. It just ends without making any sense at all. Confused, Twilight took a moment to desperately search the room for a second note, only to find nothing of the sort. Frustrated, Twilight lifted up the original paper with her magic and sent a flame through it, incinerating the note to ashes. "Stupid mare," she accused, looking back down at the still body of Rainbow Dash. "Stupid, stupid mare." Completely drained and out of options, Twilight laid down next to the Cyan Pegasus, wrapping a lavender hoof around her body. She was cold. Ever so cold. But the unicorn didn't mind. Exhausted and ripped of emotions, Twilight placed her head on Dash's, giving the other pony a gentle nuzzle. As they lay there, Twilight heard one last thought enter her head before falling asleep. One last, destructive, dangerous, horrible thought. One thought that would alter the course of Twilight's life for longer than she would have ever wanted it to. I could have stopped this.